Hello, and welcome to Overcoming Challenges to Successful Asthma Adherence and Control. So today we're going to be talking about the prevalence of asthma, its diagnosis, and a lot about its management. I have a lot to get through and hope you really enjoy it. So this is current asthma prevalence measured by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. You can see that asthma is very common overall, slightly more common among children versus adults, slightly more common among females versus males, and definitely more common among Black individuals compared with whites and Hispanics. And so we'll talk about best asthma practices today. First of all, you want to get the right classification for asthma initially. It's critical for starting the right kind of treatment. We'll be talking about hazard reduction, so the basics of asthma management, because that can go a long way. It's not all about medications alone. Using the medications correctly is important, and we'll be talking about the fact that many individuals don't know how to use their inhalers appropriately. Then we'll spend a lot of time on therapeutics and talk about following up patients. All right, so let's talk about getting asthma right. So first, we think about getting the classification correct, and this is something that could well come up on the USMLE exam. Intermittent asthma is defined by symptoms less than 2 days per week. The next class is mild persistent asthma. Symptoms aren't daily in these patients, and they have relatively rare nighttime awakenings with a preserved FEV1 to FVC ratio. Moderate persistent is associated with daily symptoms, as well as awakening at least on a weekly basis, and moderate impairment of that FEV1 to FVC ratio. Severe persistent asthma is defined by symptoms throughout the day, limited function overall, and a significantly reduced FE1 overall. Now, I think that this is important to consider for the initial diagnosis of asthma, but asthma does follow a variable course, can get better, can get worse. Oftentimes in children, over time, it does tend to improve, but that can take years. And so once you make the initial diagnosis, the key is follow them up closely and therefore, until they're well controlled, and if they have more symptoms, they should come back to you, because these categories can change over time. Just because you have mild persistent asthma when you're 12 years old doesn't mean you're going to have it when you're 16. All right, let's talk about hazard reduction, because this is something people can forget about. First of all, spirometry is absolutely indicated for the diagnosis of asthma. Even 5-year-olds should be able to try it. And that's important because it cinches the fact that there's some kind of reversibility in terms of their FEV1 with the use of a short-acting beta agonist. So overall, the treatment goals for asthma: reduce impairment associated with the illness and reduce the number of exacerbations. And that means finding triggers and allergens. So this might be pets, it might be certain pollens, or other plant products at certain times of the year, but avoiding those triggers is key. And if it's persistent asthma, it's always worth considering allergy testing. And the best approaches to avoiding triggers are multifaceted. So that might mean a mask at certain times plus avoidance of the cat. There's different ways. So usually when it's multi-pronged as an effort to reduce triggers, that's going to be the most effective. And simple things like wearing a mask or a scarf can make a big difference in exercise-induced bronchoconstriction. I didn't necessarily know this. Maybe it's because I'm from California. We don't have that much cold weather, but wearing a mask or a scarf can really help. If a child in particular has exercise-induced bronchoconstriction, shouldn't limit their play. We don't want these kids sitting on the sidelines avoiding physical activity. And in fact, it may be a sign when they have persistent exercise-induced symptoms that it's time to begin a controller medication. Step up from just a beta agonist alone, short-acting, to using a corticosteroid to control their symptoms a little better day to day. Okay, how to use this inhaler? Well, it's an inhaler. What's that hard, right? Well, this is a study of 73 children between 2 and 18 years, and they all had an asthma exacerbation. They were tested on their use of their metered-dose inhaler, or MDI. Only 45% could use it appropriately. We provide spacers, like this little girl here has a spacer. That should allow for easier use of the MDI. Unfortunately, in this sample, it didn't improve things at all. 44% still were misusing their MDI. And they also know that 17% of kids who were told to be using their peak flow meters were actually doing so. These are kids with more moderate to severe asthma, and they weren't following through on the recommendations. And that must get better with age, right? You get older, you get wiser, you know how to take care of yourself. Well, this is 450 adults presenting to the emergency department. So similarly, patients who probably have less control because they're coming to the emergency department, guess what their rate of improper meter dose inhaler use was? 45%. So nothing had improved between the time they were kids with asthma to when they were adults with asthma. They misused their MDIs at pretty much the same rate. Why? A lack of education in the first place about how to use the inhaler appropriately, and not seeing somebody regularly in follow-up to help reinforce those lessons. And improper MDI use is a serious business. It's associated with a higher asthma symptom score, and it's associated with more frequent visits to the emergency department. Therefore, bringing in the inhaler and showing me as a physician how they're using it is a critical part of asthma management. And I try to do that on the majority of visits if I can. Okay, let's focus on medications now. What is the right medication for the right class of patient? So for intermittent asthma, mild intermittent, only a short-acting beta agonist is necessary. And it's also first-line treatment for exercise-induced asthma. Whereas once you hit the persistent category, the key is initiate controller therapy. Inhaled corticosteroids do have some systemic absorption, and so therefore I try to use a low dose if it's a mild case of asthma. Start at the lowest dose that's tolerated, and then move up from there as needed based on their symptomatology. More severe symptoms, higher dose of inhaled corticosteroid or ICS. Once they hit the moderate persistent category, it's time to consider adding another agent, such as a long-acting beta agonist, which is something that I'd prefer, or a drug like montelukast can also be helpful in addition to their medium-dose ICS, which is, again, ICS is a mainstay of therapy for persistent asthma. Once they hit severe persistent range, now we're talking about a high-dose ICS with the LABA or montelukast. And unfortunately, these cases may require oral steroids as well at a low dose. And anyone who needs oral steroids, this is a rare phenomenon. It has to be very severe asthma. One, look hard at their triggers and the allergens. Make sure that they're doing everything they can with lifestyle to be well, and also refer them. They're going to need pulmonary medicine follow-up. Tiotropium was approved now for the management of asthma in patients who are at least 12 years old. It's the first long-acting antimuscarinic for asthma specifically. It's held an approval for COPD for longer. And in clinical trials, when added to patients already on an inhaled corticosteroid, tiotropium was associated with better FEV1 from baseline, and it improved FEV1 more than salmeterol. So there is another treatment option available for patients with at least moderate persistent asthma. And just a quick mention that long-acting beta agonists should never be used alone in patients with asthma, because in one trial they were associated with a higher risk of death. But it is safe to combine them with a corticosteroid. Again, that's a foundational drug, so it should be automatic. Now, your PCPs, like me, can be helpful in managing other conditions that are associated with worse asthma outcomes and more exacerbations. So what else can make asthma worse? GERD can, gastroesophageal reflux disease. Obesity can. Obstructive sleep apnea certainly can. Rhinitis, very common. At least 30% of patients with asthma also have allergic rhinitis. Stress can make it worse, as well as depression. So if you have a patient who's on heavy medical therapy for asthma and doing what they can for avoidance of triggers, and yet they're not doing as well as they should, think about some of these other illnesses and try to bring those under control. It might have the side benefit of improving asthma. All right, and now let's talk about follow-up for these patients. So really, it has to be close follow-up until the patient achieves control. And like I said, it's not so important what category of asthma they were diagnosed with initially. Once they're initiated on treatment, is this enough to control them in their day-to-day, night-to-night symptoms? And do we need to increase it? You can let go of what category they're in. So watching for triggers and assessing that mirrored dose inhaler technique. Patients get very confused, particularly when you start adding on inhalers. You're not necessarily covering their older inhalers versus their newer ones and which ones are for what and how you take them. That's why a teach back with patients showing you the inhaler, how often they use it, and then how to use it is really important. Adjust medications at every visit, can be every 2 weeks. And you want an asthma action plan too. Exacerbation is happening, start with your short-acting beta agonist. I give my patients a rescue dose of prednisone at home because it can prevent them coming in the emergency department in extreme exacerbation. If I can treat it at home, all the better. But that said, I don't want them using prednisone all the time due to the side effects. Those treatments can be tied to their peak flows and their daily symptoms. All right, so with that, what we learned about today was a little bit about the epidemiology and the classification of asthma, very important for test-taking purposes. Important for that initial consult with the patient, but then after that, it really becomes just managing the medications right and not forgetting about the basics, like using the MDI appropriately and avoiding triggers and allergens. Hope it's helpful. Take care.